The morning sun broke through the clouds over London, casting golden light across the ancient stones of Westminster Abbey. It was May 6, 2023, a day that would be remembered in British history forever. The streets were packed with people from all corners of the world, some who had camped for days just to catch a glimpse of the royal procession. Union Jack flags fluttered in the gentle breeze, held high by excited hands of all ages. Inside Kensington Palace, the Wales family was preparing for one of the most significant days of their lives. Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before an ornate mirror in her private chambers. Her personal dresser carefully adjusted the ivory silk dress that had been specially designed for this momentous occasion. The gown featured intricate embroidery along the bodice with delicate pearl detailing that caught the morning light. Kate's dark hair was being styled into an elegant updo with soft tendrils framing her face. In the adjacent room, Prince William was being helped into his ceremonial uniform. The deep blue fabric was adorned with gold braiding and medals that represented his years of service and royal duty. He adjusted his collar nervously, thinking about the weight of the day ahead. This was not just any royal event. This was his father's coronation, the moment Charles would officially become king. William knew that one day, he would stand where his father would stand today, and the thought filled him with both pride and responsibility. Down the hallway, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the palace corridors. Prince George, at 9 years old, was trying to tie his own ceremonial outfit, while his younger sister, Princess Charlotte, watched with amusement. Charlotte, 7 years old, was already dressed in her white dress with silver embellishments. Looking every bit the young princess she was, she twirled in front of the mirror, watching her dress flow around her. Prince Louis, the youngest at 5 years old, was perhaps the most excited of all. He bounced on his heels as his nanny helped him into his matching blue suit. Louis had been talking about the coronation for weeks, asking endless questions about what would happen, who would be there, and whether he would get to wear a crown too. His innocent enthusiasm brought smiles to everyone in the household. Kate took a moment to peek in on her children. Seeing them all dressed and ready, she felt her heart swell with pride and a touch of nervousness. She knew the world would be watching every moment, every gesture, every expression. The children had been prepared for weeks about proper behavior and protocol, but they were still children, and Kate wanted them to enjoy this special family moment despite all the formality. William joined his wife, and together they stood watching their children. George noticed his parents and straightened his posture immediately, mimicking the formal stance he had been taught. Charlotte smiled sweetly, while Louis waved enthusiastically at them. The couple exchanged a knowing look. They had worked hard to give their children as normal a childhood as possible, but today would remind everyone, including George, Charlotte, and Louis, of their extraordinary destiny. The staff at Kensington Palace moved with practiced efficiency, making final checks and ensuring every detail was perfect. Security personnel communicated through earpieces, coordinating the departure time with the teams already stationed along the procession route. The royal cars were lined up outside, polished to perfection, their windows tinted just enough for privacy, while still allowing the public glimpses of the family inside. Outside the palace gates, crowds had already gathered, hoping for an early sighting of the Wales family. Camera crews from around the globe had set up their equipment hours before, securing the best angles to capture the departure. News anchors spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the historic significance of the day, speculating about what the Princess of Wales would wear and how the children would behave during the lengthy ceremony. Back inside, Kate knelt down to speak with her children one last time before they left. She reminded them gently about the importance of the day, about showing respect for their grandfather, and about representing their family with grace. George nodded seriously, understanding the weight of his role as second in line to the throne. Charlotte promised to be on her best behavior, and Louis, though trying his best to be serious, couldn't contain his excited grin. As the family made their final preparations to leave, Kate placed a reassuring hand on William's arm. They had been through countless royal events together, but this one felt different. This was about family, about legacy, about the continuation of a monarchy that had endured for over 1,000 years. William squeezed her hand gently, grateful for her steady presence beside him. The moment was approaching. Soon they would step out of the palace and into the public eye. Soon they would take their places in Westminster Abbey for a ceremony that had been planned down to the last second. Soon the world would watch as King Charles III was crowned, and the Wales family would take another step forward in their royal journey. The anticipation hung in the air like electricity, thrilling and slightly nerve-wracking all at once. Kate took one last look in the mirror, adjusted her dress one final time, and took a deep breath. William gathered the children, speaking to them in a calm, encouraging voice. The staff stood ready by the doors. Outside, the crowds grew louder, their excitement building. The day that would go down in history was about to truly begin, and the Wales family was ready to play their part with dignity, grace, and love. The heavy wooden doors of Kensington Palace opened with a solemn creak that seemed to announce the gravity of the moment. Prince William stepped out first, his uniform catching the sunlight, every medal and insignia gleaming. Behind him, Kate emerged, and the crowd that had been buzzing with conversation suddenly fell into a reverent hush before erupting into cheers. She was stunning, her ivory gown flowing elegantly with each step, her composure absolute despite the thousands of eyes upon her. The children followed their parents in order of age. Prince George walked with careful, measured steps, his young face serious as he concentrated on maintaining the dignified bearing he had been taught. Princess Charlotte came next, her natural grace making her appear to float rather than walk. She smiled gently at the crowd, a perfect balance of friendliness and royal reserve. Little Prince Louis brought up the rear, his eyes wide as he took in the sea of people, cameras, and flags. He gave a small wave that immediately captured hearts around the world. The waiting vehicles gleamed in the morning sun, their doors held open by white-gloved attendants. William helped Kate into the first car, ensuring her dress settled properly before she sat. The fabric pooled around her in elegant folds, the embroidery catching the light like tiny stars. William took his seat beside her, and together they watched as their children were helped into the car behind them. George sat straight and tall while Charlotte positioned herself carefully, and Louis pressed his face against the window, eager to see everything. As the motorcade began to move, the cheers from the crowd intensified. People waved flags frantically, held up phones to capture photos, and called out blessings and congratulations. Kate smiled and waved gracefully, her movements fluid and practiced. William nodded at the crowd with the serious expression that had become his trademark during official events. In the car behind, Charlotte waved enthusiastically while George gave more reserved acknowledgments. Louis continued to be mesmerized by the spectacle around him. The route from Kensington Palace to Westminster Abbey had been planned with precision. Every street was lined with barriers to hold back the crowds, and security personnel were stationed at regular intervals. Police officers on horseback rode alongside the motorcade, their mounts stepping high and proud. Overhead, helicopters hovered, their cameras capturing aerial footage that would be broadcast to millions of viewers worldwide. The streets of London had been transformed into a celebration of British heritage and royal tradition. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from every lamppost and building. Giant screens had been erected in key locations, so that those without a direct view of the procession could still witness every moment. Street performers entertained the waiting crowds, and vendors sold commemorative items, from tea towels to miniature crowns. Inside the lead car, Kate glanced at William and saw the mixture of emotions playing across his face. She knew he was thinking about his mother, Princess Diana, who should have been here to see this day. She reached over and took his hand, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. William looked at her gratefully, drawing strength from her presence as he had done countless times throughout their marriage. The journey through London gave the family a unique perspective on how deeply the monarchy was woven into the fabric of British life. They passed buildings that had stood for centuries, witnessing coronations and royal events stretching back through history. They saw families with young children perched on shoulders, elderly veterans saluting as they passed, and people of all backgrounds united in celebration of this historic moment. As they approached Westminster Abbey, the atmosphere shifted from jubilant to solemn. The ancient abbey stood imposing and magnificent, its Gothic architecture reaching toward the sky. Flags flew from its towers and the bells began to ring, their deep tones resonating through the air. The sound seemed to vibrate through the very stones of London, announcing to all that something momentous was about to occur. The motorcade slowed as it entered the secured area around the abbey. Kate could see other members of the royal family already arriving, their cars pulling up in carefully choreographed sequence. Foreign dignitaries in elaborate national dress stepped out of their vehicles, adding splashes of color and international significance to the proceedings. World leaders, presidents, and prime ministers all gathered to witness the coronation of Britain's new king. In the second car, George watched everything with intense concentration. He had been studying the order of service and knew exactly what would happen and when. Charlotte whispered something to him, probably a question about who someone was, and he answered with the knowledge of someone who had been thoroughly briefed. Louis, meanwhile, had finally stopped pressing his face to the window and was listening to instructions from the adult accompanying them about what would happen when they arrived. The cars came to a gentle stop at the entrance designated for the immediate royal family. Attendants immediately stepped forward, ready to assist. Kate could hear the roar of the crowd even through the closed windows. She took a deep breath, composed herself, and prepared to step out into one of the most photographed moments of her life. William exited first, then turned to offer his hand to Kate. As she emerged from the vehicle, cameras flashed like lightning, capturing every angle, every detail of her appearance. She stood for a moment, allowing her dress to settle, then moved gracefully to the side. The children's car door opened and George stepped out, followed by Charlotte and Louis. The sight of the three young royals brought fresh waves of applause and cheering from the assembled crowds. Kate knelt briefly to adjust Louis's collar and whisper some final words of encouragement. Charlotte smoothed her dress and George stood tall, ready for the responsibility he knew lay ahead. William placed a reassuring hand on his eldest son's shoulder. Together as a family, they turned toward the abbey entrance where history waited. The massive doors stood open, and beyond them, the coronation ceremony that would crown a king and shape the future of a nation was about to begin. The Wales family exchanged one last look of mutual support and love before stepping forward into their destiny. Stepping through the ancient doors of Westminster Abbey was like entering another world, one where time stood still and history lived and breathed in every stone. The temperature dropped noticeably, the thick walls keeping out the warmth of the May morning. The scent of centuries-old wood and stone mixed with fresh flowers that had been arranged throughout the abbey for this special day. Above, the vaulted ceilings soared to seemingly impossible heights, and the stained glass windows filtered the sunlight into pools of colored light that danced across the floor. The abbey was filled to capacity with over 2,000 guests, each one dressed in their finest attire. The rustle of fabric and the quiet murmur of conversation created a subtle background hum that spoke of anticipation and excitement. As the Wales family entered, heads turned and the whispers grew slightly louder. Kate walked with perfect posture, her training as a royal evident in every graceful movement. William matched her stride, his military background showing in his bearing and precision. Young Prince George walked behind his parents, his role today particularly significant. As second in line to the throne, he would serve as one of the pages of honor, a position of great responsibility for someone so young. His face remained serious, but his eyes darted around, taking in the magnificent surroundings. The abbey was a treasure trove of historical artifacts, royal tombs, and architectural wonders that he had studied but never quite experienced in this way. Charlotte held herself with remarkable poise for a 7-year-old. She had been coached extensively on royal protocol, but something in her demeanor suggested that grace came naturally to her. She looked around with wide eyes, not with nervousness but with genuine wonder at the beauty surrounding them. Her white dress seemed to glow in the filtered light from the stained glass windows, and more than one guest remarked quietly on how much she resembled her great-grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth II. At that age, Prince Louis, ever the spirited child, tried his best to maintain the serious demeanor expected of him. He walked carefully, watching his feet to make sure he was stepping properly. Occasionally he would glance up at the ornate decorations and his mouth would form a small O of amazement. The abbey was unlike anything he had experienced before, and despite all the preparation and practice, nothing could quite capture the reality of this moment. Royal ushers guided the family toward their designated seats, positioned in a place of honor near the front of the abbey. The seating arrangement had been debated and refined for months, with every placement carrying symbolic significance. Kate and William would sit where they could clearly see the coronation ceremony, close enough to be part of the intimate family moment. yet positioned to represent their role as the future king and queen consort. As they made their way down the aisle, Kate noticed familiar faces among the congregation. Members of her own family, the Middletons, were seated in a section reserved for the bride's relatives, a reminder of how far she had come from her middle-class upbringing to become the Princess of Wales. Her parents, Carol and Michael, caught her eye and smiled with obvious pride. Her siblings, Pippa and James, sat nearby, looking dignified in their formal attire. The abbey itself seemed to embrace the royal family, its walls echoing with the footsteps of countless monarchs who had walked these same stones. This was where Queen Elizabeth II had been crowned 70 years earlier, where William and Kate themselves had been married in 2011, and where so many pivotal moments in British royal history had unfolded. The weight of that history was palpable, adding layers of meaning to every gesture and movement. William helped Kate settle into her seat, ensuring she was comfortable despite the restrictive formality of her gown. She smiled at him gratefully, then turned her attention to the children. George had taken his position with the other pages of honor, standing ready to perform his duties during the ceremony. He looked so small yet so brave in his red and gold uniform, and Kate felt her heart squeeze with maternal pride and a touch of anxiety for how he would handle the pressure. Charlotte and Louis sat nearby, under the watchful eye of a trusted member of the royal household staff. Louis fidgeted slightly, trying to get comfortable, until Charlotte whispered something to him that made him still. She had always been good at managing her younger brother, and today that skill would prove particularly valuable. Around them, the abbey continued to fill with distinguished guests. Members of Parliament, military leaders, Commonwealth representatives, and European royalty all took their designated seats. The diplomatic seating arrangements represented months of careful negotiation, ensuring that no one felt slighted while honoring the appropriate hierarchies and relationships between nations. The choir, positioned in the traditional location, began their vocal warm-ups, their voices blending in harmonies that filled the vast space of the abbey. The musicians tuned their instruments, creating a subtle symphony of preparation. The organist ran through portions of the music that would accompany the ceremony, the mighty organ's deep tones resonating through the stone structure. Kate took a moment to look around and absorb the magnitude of what was happening. Every detail had been planned with meticulous care. The flowers were arranged in specific colors representing different aspects of the United Kingdom. The lighting had been adjusted to ensure that cameras could capture the ceremony clearly while maintaining the sacred atmosphere of the space. Even the temperature was being monitored to ensure the comfort of guests during what would be a lengthy ceremony. William sat with his thoughts, preparing himself mentally for what lay ahead. He would watch his father be crowned king, a moment that represented both an ending and a beginning. It meant accepting that he was now first in line to the throne, that his own destiny had moved one step closer. He glanced at George, seeing in his son's serious young face a reflection of the weight that would one day rest on those small shoulders. The activity in the abbey intensified as the start time approached. Officials in ceremonial dress moved through the space, ensuring everything was in perfect order. The Archbishop of Canterbury arrived, resplendent in his religious vestments, carrying the authority of the Church of England that would sanctify the coronation. Camera operators made final adjustments to their equipment, knowing that their footage would be watched by billions of people around the world. Kate reached over and squeezed William's hand one more time. They exchanged a look that spoke of their shared journey, from university students to husband and wife to parents to future monarchs. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as they always had. The organ music swelled, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin, and the Wales family settled into their seats, ready to witness history being made. The abbey fell into hushed silence as the first notes of the processional music began. Every eye turned toward the entrance, where the grand procession would soon appear. Kate felt her breath catch in her throat, a mixture of emotion and anticipation coursing through her. Beside her, William sat straighter, his hands folded in his lap, his expression calm, but his eyes revealing the depth of feeling beneath the surface. The procession began with members of the clergy, walking in perfect formation, their robes flowing behind them. They carried crosses and religious symbols that had been used in coronations for centuries. Behind them came representatives from the Church of England, followed by members of the royal household in their ceremonial uniforms. Each person moved with practiced precision, their steps timed to the music echoing through the ancient space. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. King Charles III entered the abbey, and the congregation rose as one in a gesture of respect. He wore the crimson robe of state, its train so long that it required several attendants to manage it. His expression was solemn but peaceful, a man accepting his destiny with grace and humility. Beside him walked Queen Camilla, elegant in her own robes, her face reflecting the significance of the moment. Kate watched her father-in-law with admiration and compassion. She knew how long he had waited for this moment, how he had prepared his entire life for this role. Charles had been Prince of Wales longer than any heir in British history, and now, at last, he was being crowned king. She glanced at William and saw the emotion flickering across his face as he watched his father. This was personal for him in ways the public could never fully understand. Young George stood with the other pages of honor near the throne area. His job was to hold the robes during key moments of the ceremony, a task that required concentration and steadiness. Kate watched her son anxiously, proud of his composure but aware of how much pressure rested on his young shoulders. George met her eyes for just a moment, and she gave him an encouraging smile that seemed to strengthen his resolve. The Archbishop of Canterbury began the ceremony with prayers that dated back hundreds of years. His voice filled the abbey, calling upon divine blessing for the new king. The words were steeped in tradition, connecting this moment to every coronation that had come before, creating an unbroken chain of monarchy, stretching back through the centuries. Kate found herself moved by the spiritual weight of the ceremony, the sense that they were participating in something far greater than themselves. Charlotte sat quietly, her attention fixed on the proceedings with remarkable focus for someone her age. She watched everything with intelligent, observant eyes, absorbing the pageantry and ritual. Occasionally, she would lean slightly toward Louis to whisper something, probably explaining what was happening or reminding him to sit still. Her maturity and natural leadership qualities were evident even at 7 years old. Louis, true to his spirited nature, had moments of perfect stillness, interspersed with periods of obvious restlessness. He swung his legs slightly, earning a gentle correction from the adult supervising him. But when the most important moments occurred, when the crown jewels were brought forward, or when his grandfather knelt in prayer, Louis watched with rapt attention, his young mind processing this extraordinary experience in whatever way a 5-year-old could comprehend such grandeur. The ceremony progressed through its carefully choreographed stages. The anointing, the most sacred part of the ceremony, was partially hidden from view by a canopy held by Knights of the Garter. William stood during this portion, along with other senior royals, in a gesture of respect and recognition. Kate could see his profile as he watched his father being anointed with holy oil, his jaw tight with emotion. When the moment came for the actual crowning, the abbey seemed to hold its collective breath. The Archbishop lifted St. Edward's crown, a magnificent creation of gold and precious stones that had crowned monarchs since 1661. The crown was heavy, both physically and symbolically, representing the weight of responsibility that Charles was accepting. As it was placed upon his head, a great cry went up from outside the abbey where crowds watching on screens celebrated the moment. Kate felt tears prick her eyes, though she maintained her composure. This was a moment she had known would come eventually, but experiencing it was profoundly different from imagining it. William's father was now king, which meant William was now officially the heir to the throne, and George, standing so bravely at his position, was second in line. The reality of their future had crystallized in this moment. George performed his duties flawlessly, moving when required, holding the robes with steady hands, never faltering despite the enormous attention focused on him. Kate wanted to rush to him, to gather him in her arms and tell him how proud she was, but protocol demanded she remain in her seat. She settled for sending him looks of love and encouragement whenever their eyes met. The ceremony continued with the presentation of various regalia items. The sovereign's orb, representing Christian authority, was placed in the king's right hand. The scepter with the cross, containing the legendary culinary diamond, was placed in his left hand. Each item carried centuries of meaning and tradition. Charles held them with dignity, accepting each symbol of his authority and responsibility. Queen Camilla was then crowned in a separate but equally significant ceremony. Kate watched with interest, knowing that one day she herself would sit where Camilla sat now, would wear a crown and accept the role of queen. The thought was both thrilling and daunting. She looked at William and wondered if he was thinking the same thoughts about his own future coronation. The moment came for the homage, when senior royals would pledge their loyalty to the new king. William rose from his seat, and Kate's heart swelled with pride as she watched him approach his father. He was dressed in his full ceremonial regalia, every inch a future king himself. He knelt before his father, placing his hands between the king's hands in the traditional gesture of fealty. The words William spoke echoed through the abbey with clarity and conviction. He pledged to be his father's liege man of life and limb, to live and die against all manner of folks. It was a medieval oath, unchanged for centuries, and hearing William speak it to his father created a powerful connection between past and present. When he finished, Charles leaned forward and kissed his son on both cheeks, a gesture that was both ceremonial and deeply personal. Kate saw the emotion on both their faces, the love between father and son that transcended titles and crowns. William returned to his seat beside her, and she could see him blinking back tears. She took his hand again, offering silent support. Around them the ceremony continued, but for that moment, it was as if they existed in their own private space, sharing the weight and wonder of what they had just witnessed. Charlotte watched her father's oath with solemn eyes, perhaps beginning to understand the magnitude of her family's role in history. Louis had grown quieter now, the length of the ceremony beginning to tire him, but he continued to try his best. George remained at his post, professional and composed, a young prince learning to bear the burden of his destiny with grace. Together, the Wales family sat through the rest of the ceremony, each processing in their own way what this day meant for their lives, their family, and their future. As the coronation ceremony drew toward its conclusion, the atmosphere in Westminster Abbey shifted from solemn reverence to joyful celebration. The heavy, sacred moments had passed, and now came the recognition of what had been accomplished. King Charles III sat upon the throne, crowned and anointed, the legitimate monarch in the eyes of God and country. Queen Camilla sat beside him, her own crown gleaming in the light. The transformation from prince and duchess to king and queen was complete. The choir burst into triumphant song, their voices soaring to the vaulted ceiling in praise and celebration. The organ joined in, its powerful tones vibrating through the stone floors and pillars. Kate felt the music wash over her, stirring something deep within her soul. She glanced at William and saw his face had relaxed from the tension of the earlier moments. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth as he watched his father, crowned at last. Prince George was finally released from his duties as page of honor and made his way back to join his family. Kate immediately reached out to him, pulling him close and whispering words of pride and praise in his ear. George's serious expression finally cracked into a smile, relief evident on his young face. He had done it, had fulfilled his role without error, and the weight that had been pressing on him lifted. He settled into the seat beside his mother, and she kept one arm around him, unable to resist the maternal gesture despite the formal setting. Charlotte leaned over to her brother and said something that made him grin wider. Louis, seeing George's return, perked up considerably, perhaps hoping this meant the long ceremony was finally ending. He had been remarkably well behaved considering his age and natural energy, though there had been moments when Kate had seen him struggling to sit still. Now, sensing that the end was near, he seemed to find a second wind of patience. The Archbishop offered final prayers and blessings, his voice carrying authority and warmth. He spoke of the king's duties to his people, of service and sacrifice, of leadership and humility. These were words that resonated deeply with William, who had spent his entire adult life preparing for the role that would one day be his. Kate saw him listening intently, absorbing the wisdom being offered, storing it away for his own future. The ceremony concluded with a procession of thanksgiving, clergy and officials filing past the newly crowned king and queen in a show of respect and loyalty. Representatives from all corners of the Commonwealth were present, a reminder that Charles's role extended far beyond the borders of the United Kingdom. The diversity of faces and traditional dress reflected the complex, multicultural nature of the modern monarchy. Then came the moment to depart the Abbey. The King and Queen would lead the procession out, followed by the senior members of the royal family in strict order of precedence. William and Kate, as the Prince and Princess of Wales, would be among the first to follow. The family rose from their seats, and Kate took a moment to check that everyone was ready. She smoothed Charlotte's dress, adjusted Louis's collar one more time, and exchanged a meaningful look with George. The grand doors of Westminster Abbey opened, and the sound of the waiting crowds flooded in like a wave. The roar was tremendous, thousands upon thousands of voices raised in celebration. The King and Queen emerged first, and the noise intensified to almost deafening levels. Inside the Abbey, the Wales family waited their turn, the children lined up and ready, their parents close beside them. When it was their turn, William stepped forward first, then turned to offer his hand to Kate. She took it, and together, they walked toward the doorway, toward the light and the crowds and the cameras. Behind them, the children followed, George walking tall with newfound confidence after successfully completing his ceremonial role, Charlotte graceful and composed, and Louis trying his best to maintain the dignity expected of him while his excitement threatened to bubble over. The moment they appeared in the doorway, the crowd's response was overwhelming. People screamed their names, waved flags frantically, and called out blessings and congratulations. Kate's smile was radiant as she waved to the people, her natural warmth evident in every gesture. William waved with more restraint but obvious pleasure, clearly moved by the public's enthusiasm. The children were an instant hit, their youth and charm capturing hearts everywhere. Photographers' cameras clicked in a continuous staccato rhythm, capturing every angle, every expression, every moment. This was what the world had been waiting for, the opportunity to see the future of the monarchy, the next generation of royals who would carry the institution forward. Kate knew that every image would be analyzed, every gesture interpreted, every look between family members scrutinized for meaning. The royal procession made its way to the waiting carriages for the journey back to Buckingham Palace. The King and Queen would travel in the Gold State Coach, a magnificent vehicle that had been used in coronations since 1831. William and Kate, along with their children, would follow in a separate carriage, one that was more comfortable but no less impressive. As they approached their carriage, Kate helped the children climb aboard, making sure they were safely settled before taking her own seat beside William. The interior was luxurious, with velvet cushions and gold detailing, but it was also surprisingly cramped with all 5 of them inside. Louis immediately pressed his face to the window, eager to see everything, while Charlotte sat properly, and George looked around with interest at the carriage's historic features. The procession began to move, and the crowd's enthusiasm reached new heights. The route back to the palace would take them through central London, allowing thousands more people to catch a glimpse of the newly crowned king and his family. Police officers on horseback flanked the carriages, their mounts decorated with ceremonial gear. Military bands played stirring marches, adding to the festive atmosphere. Inside the carriage, Kate and William waved continuously, their arms beginning to ache, but their smiles never faltering. The children took turns waving, with Charlotte showing them all how it should be done with her perfect royal wave. Louis copied her with less precision but more enthusiasm, his little hand moving back and forth energetically. George waved with growing confidence, no longer the nervous boy who had entered the Abbey hours earlier. The sun had fully emerged now, bathing London in golden light. The Union Jack flags looked vibrant against the blue sky, and the crowd seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Kate looked at her family, at William beside her, at their 3 beautiful children, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude and love. They were living through history, but more importantly, they were living through it together. As Buckingham Palace came into view, the crowds became even more dense. People had packed the area around the palace, filling the Mall and Victoria Memorial, all hoping to see the royal family appear on the famous balcony. The carriage passed through the palace gates, and suddenly, they were in the relative quiet of the courtyard, the massive gates closing behind them to shut out the roaring crowds. The Wales family had made it through one of the most significant days in recent royal history, and they had done it with grace, dignity, and love. Inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The Wales family descended from their carriage, and staff members immediately surrounded them, offering refreshments and a brief moment to rest before the next major event. The balcony appearance was perhaps the most anticipated moment of the entire day. The image that would be printed in newspapers and history books for generations to come. Kate knelt down to check on the children one more time. Louise's hair had become slightly mussed during the carriage ride, and she smoothed it back into place with gentle fingers. Charlotte's dress had remained perfect, but Kate adjusted a small detail anyway, more out of motherly habit than necessity. George stood still, allowing his mother's attention, but his eyes were focused on the doors that would lead them to the balcony, clearly thinking about what was to come. William had stepped aside to speak briefly with his father, now King Charles. The two men stood close together, their conversation private and clearly emotional. Charles placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture that spoke of gratitude, love, and the shared understanding of their unique positions. When William returned to Kate's side, his eyes were slightly red, but his expression was peaceful. The time had come. Palace officials signaled that they should prepare to move to the balcony. The family was arranged in specific positions, carefully planned to present the right image to the watching world. King Charles and Queen Camilla would stand in the center, with William and Kate on either side, and the children positioned where they could be clearly seen but not overwhelmed by the attention. They made their way through the palace corridors, their footsteps echoing on marble floors. Through the windows they could hear the distant roar of the crowd outside, a sound that had been continuous since early morning. Louis held his mother's hand tightly, his earlier bravado giving way to a hint of nervousness about appearing before so many people. Charlotte walked confidently, while George stayed close to his father. The doors to the balcony stood closed, and beyond them lay one of the most famous views in the world. Palace staff made final checks, ensuring everything was perfect. A signal was given and the doors were opened. The sound of the crowd exploded in volume, a wall of noise that was almost physical in its intensity. King Charles stepped out first, and the cheers became deafening. William and Kate followed with the children, and the crowd's response somehow intensified even more. Kate was struck by the sheer number of people stretching as far as she could see down the mall. The sea of faces, flags, and phones held high to capture the moment was breathtaking. She waved, her smile genuine and warm, while beside her William waved with his free hand, the other resting protectively on George's shoulder. The children's reactions were captured by cameras and would become some of the most beloved images of the day. Charlotte waved with perfect form, looking every bit the princess she was. George waved more tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as the crowd's enthusiasm emboldened him. Louis, after his initial nervousness, broke into a huge smile and waved enthusiastically, his natural exuberance winning over everyone watching. The family stood together on the balcony for several minutes, waving and acknowledging the crowd. The king stood in the center, his crown still upon his head, the weight of his new role visible in his bearing, but also a sense of satisfaction and purpose. Queen Camilla stood beside him, elegant and dignified. Together, the royal family presented an image of continuity and stability, of tradition meeting the modern world. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The Royal Air Force flypast would occur, a tradition that marked major royal celebrations. The crowd's attention shifted to the sky, necks craning to spot the first aircraft. Kate pulled Louis a bit closer, wanting to make sure he could see. Charlotte stood on her toes, trying to get a better view. George pointed when he spotted the first planes approaching. The roar of jet engines announced the arrival of the flypast before the planes came into view. Then they appeared, flying in perfect formation, trailing red, white, and blue smoke that painted the sky with the colors of the Union Jack. The sight was spectacular, a combination of military precision and patriotic symbolism that stirred emotion in everyone watching. The children's faces lit up with wonder and excitement. Louis's reaction was pure joy, his earlier composure forgotten as he pointed and exclaimed at the planes. Charlotte watched with delighted fascination, while George tried to maintain his dignity but couldn't help breaking into a wide grin. Kate and William exchanged amused, loving looks as they watched their children's genuine reactions. These were the moments that reminded them their children were still just that. Children, despite all the royal protocol and public attention. The planes passed overhead, their engines fading into the distance, and the family remained on the balcony for a few more moments of waving, before finally retreating back inside the palace. The doors closed, and suddenly they were in the relative quiet of the palace interior again. The contrast was startling, moving from the overwhelming noise and energy of the public moment to the calm, private space. Louis immediately started chattering excitedly about the planes, his words tumbling over each other in his enthusiasm. Charlotte laughed at her brother's excitement, while George allowed himself to finally relax, the tension of the day releasing from his small shoulders. Kate gathered all three children close, kissing each of their heads, telling them how proud she was of them. William joined the embrace, creating a family huddle that represented their unity and love. King Charles approached with Queen Camilla, and for a moment it was just family, not monarchs and heirs and future rulers. Charles spoke warmly to his grandchildren, praising their behavior and thanking George specifically for his role in the ceremony. The children beamed under their grandfather's approval, and Kate felt her heart full to bursting with love for all of them. The rest of the day would be filled with more obligations, photographs, a coronation banquet, and countless other requirements of the occasion, but for this brief moment they were simply a family who had shared an extraordinary experience. Kate looked at William and saw in his eyes the same mixture of exhaustion, pride, and love that she felt. They had made it through one of the most significant days in their lives, and they had done it together as a team. As they walked through the palace toward the next event, Kate held William's hand on one side and Louis on the other, with Charlotte and George walking just ahead. The coronation of King Charles III was complete, but more than that, the Wales family had shown the world what the future of the monarchy would look like. It would be grounded in love, strengthened by unity, and carried forward by the next generation who had proven today that they were ready for whatever destiny had in store for them. The day would be remembered forever, documented in photographs and video, written about in history books and news articles. But for Kate, William, and their children, it would be remembered as the day they stood together before the world, representing not just a monarchy, but a family committed to service, duty, and most importantly, to each other. As the sun began to set on this historic day, the Wales family knew that while much had changed, the love that bound them together remained constant, their greatest strength and their most precious treasure.